This tutorial is on what we call our x-intercept or our zero, and it's also going to be over our y-intercept and what it looks like when we're graphing it. So I do want you to know a few things. We're going to go ahead, we're going to look at two different equations so that we can see two different situations that you're going to be faced with when you're working on one of these problems. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with the one that's most simple. And for instance, we're going to go ahead and we're going to graph the equation 2x plus 4. Now notice I have a TI calculator over here, 84 plus. This is the one that's going to come up in your ELC if you're taking your Algebra 1. It's also the type of calculator we have in the classroom and that most college campuses allow. So let's go ahead and use it. I'm going to go ahead and click on y equals. And when I click on y equals, I'm going to type in my equation there. And so I'm going to type in 2 and then x plus 4. So let's say a lot of times they're going to give you an equation and they're going to ask what is the y and the x-intercept. Or they could ask what is the y-intercept and what is the zero. So I want you to know one little note, make a little note here. I want you to know that the x-intercept and the zero are the same thing. So I'm going to write same thing. Now, we have two different names for it, and there's a reason for that. And when we talk about the x-intercept, we're usually talking about an ordered pair. And when I say ordered pair, notice right here we have an x and a y value. In other words, there's going to be some value, some number given for x, and there's going to be some value given for y. So that is an ordered pair, and that's what we're going to write in here. We're going to give the location of the x-intercept. Now, normally when they say 0, they don't want its location. They just want the x value. And so when we have an x-intercept, we're talking about when y is 0, whatever the x value is. So also I want you to keep that in mind. It's when y is 0. So our y value is going to be 0 during the x-intercept. And that's why we call it a 0, because it's when y is 0. And we just write that x value. Now on the other hand, when we talk about the y-intercept, it's actually just the opposite of what we see here. And when I say the opposite, just to give you an idea, for instance, instead of having a 0 for y, you're going to actually have your 0 for x. So y-intercept is just when we cross the y-axis, where the x value is 0. So keep that in mind as we go ahead and we graph this particular equation and take a look at it. So I'm just making sure that we're using the right calculator. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in. And once again, 2x plus 4. And it's going to be real easy to find on this equation because we're going to be able to see it in a table as well. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click graph now that I've typed it in. And I can look right here, and it looks to me, if I start at origin, my x-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis, and it looks like it's right here at -2. Now it might not be at -2, right? I recommend you always look at the table to verify, or you actually use your calculator's find the 0 function. And then it looks like my y-intercept, if I go up the y-axis, it looks like it's going to be 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it's at +4. Now before we write that down, let's go ahead and verify that is where it's located at. Now a real easy way to find that that is where it's located at is to go to your table. But right before we do that, I want to go ahead and I want to graph this equation. So I'm going to draw some lines. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Notice I went 4 to the left. Remember, when you're going to the left from origin, these values are all negative. And from origin to the right, I'm going to also go 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And these values will all be positive on the x-axis because this is your x-axis. And then the vertical, the up and down, that's going to be your y-axis. And on those we'll also put 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll go 5, 5, and down 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Remember, when you're going down below origin, it's negative, and when you're going up above origin, it is positive. Now we have those things written down. Let's take a look at our table. I'm going to go ahead and hit second, and then I'm going to hit graph. Notice this pulls up a table here, and as I said, the table is real easy to find the 0. Remember what I said over here, that when we look at the x-intercept, we're looking for when the y value is 0. And when we're looking for the y-intercept, we're looking for when the x value is 0. Now, a lot of times the calculator is automatically going to default and start off where x is 0. So for instance, here's x is 0. Notice right here my x value is 0. If I click to the right, that's my y value, 4. So my y-intercept is actually going to be 4. If they wanted the location as an ordered pair, I would write that it's 0, 4. Right? X is 0 and y is 4. And so I'm going to put a point there on my graph. If I come over to my graph, 0, 4 is going to be, I start at origin, and I go up 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to put a dot right there. I'm going to go ahead and draw an arrow and write that is my y-intercept. So it's just where it crosses the y-axis right there. Now, with that being said, if I were writing an equation, usually the number that represents the y-intercept is this b value right here. So sometimes on the internet, on the star test, I should say, on your internet star test, this practice test that I'm in right here, they could just ask you what is the y-intercept, and you may just put the number 4. Sometimes they may ask the location, the ordered pair representing the y-intercept. In that case, you would put 0, 4, because that's where the line crosses the y-axis that runs vertical up and down, is at positive 4. Keep in mind that when we're looking at this situation, this slope-intercept form of y equals mx plus b, they call it slope-intercept because the first thing you see is the slope. That m represents your slope. And then that b value right there, it represents your intercept. Therefore, we call this slope-intercept form. So that's my y-intercept. And you saw me type in the equation earlier, right? When I went over here, I said the equation is 2x plus 4. That positive 4 was our y-intercept. So even when they give you an equation, it's very easy to see the y-intercept because if it's in slope-intercept form, it's going to clearly state it. So I'm going to go ahead and write this out. The equation we graphed was y equals 2x plus 4. And our y-intercept was this positive 4. So that's the y-intercept. So I'm going to go back to graph. I'm going to go ahead and hit second, and I'm going to hit graph, pull up our table. We had 0, 4. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write that value in. So for instance, when x is 0, y is 4, and this right here represents my y-intercept. So that's how we can find it inside of a table. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the x-intercept. Remember I told you x-intercept is when y is 0. So I'm going to click through here and see when y is 0. Now I'm going to click up, and the reason I'm going to click up is when we look back at the graph, I told you that it looks like if I go from origin and go over, it looks like it crosses right here at -2. So I'm going to hit second table, and I'm going to go click up until I get to the value -2. And look, it does show when x is -2, the y is 0. So I know that this is my 0 because that's what I was looking for. I wanted to know when does it cross my x-axis, and it crosses it at -2 because that's when y is 0. What that's telling me is that if I go over here to this particular line, if I start at origin and I go ahead and I go to the left 2 times, 1, 2, this is at -2 right here, that I have a point right there. I'll draw a line, kind of make it a little bit bigger, and I'm going to put me an arrow, and I'm going to write above it, this is my x-intercept. So it is different than my y-intercept, right? Because it's not on the y-axis. X-intercept is on the x-axis. Now we know, according to our calculator, it is at -2. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to write -2. Now if they asked for the x-intercept, normally you're given an ordered pair in your activities, which would be -2, 0. But if they said they wanted to know the 0, we're just going to give them the -2 value. So again, there's two different ways we can note it. If they ask for a 0, it's just -2. If they ask for the x-intercept, then we're going to go ahead and say -2, 0. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw a line through this. I'm going to go back and graph it. I want to show you one more way that you could have found it. And so let me first draw a line through here. So we're going to connect our two intercepts. So there's my line graphed showing my two zeros and the line that crosses through them. And I'm going to go ahead and go back to table real quick. We had negative 2, 0, so I'm going to write those numbers in. So we had negative 2 and 0. And then this time I'm going to draw an arrow this way. And I'm going to put X-intercept or 0. And I would recommend that if you're doing this tutorial, if you needed some help with this, write these notes down and use them during your activity to make sure that you're looking at the right one, because it is easy to mix these up. Just notice the zeros in a different location, depending on if it's the X-intercept or if it's the Y-intercept. Now another thing that you could have done is, let's say we graph this. So I'm going to go back to my graph. Let's say that we didn't want to look at the table and we wanted to find the 0. Now there's a function for that. What I can do, and sometimes this is important because sometimes you're not going to be able to find the X-intercept in your table. The Y-intercept, most of the time it's going to show up in the table. But every once in a while the X-intercept is not going to show up in the table. And when that happens, you can use the second button and then you can use trace. And notice it gives you these different things you can calculate. The value, 0, minimum, maximum, intersection. And so some of these are going to be very useful. And what we want to do is we want to click down and go to 0. Now it'll find a 0 on any type of equation that's graphed. It'll find a 0 on a linear equation. You can later use it to find the 0 on a quadratic equation and even absolute value equations. But right now we're just going to focus on linear. That's what you start out with at the beginning of the year. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter for option 2. Notice it gives me this little dot and it's flashing. Now it says left bound, which means it wants me to go to the left of my 0. And I'm just going to use the little direction pad key to go to the left of this 0. And I'm going to hit enter. And then I'm just going to click it and go until it goes to the right of the 0. Because it says right bound. I'm going to hit click enter. Now when I hit enter a third time, watch what happens to these values down here. It's going to change it to the values that we got from our table, which is negative 2, 0. So it says the 0 is at when x is equal to negative 2. Just like what I have here. X is equal to negative 2. That's my 0. And then it tells you when x is equal to negative 2, the y value is equal to 0. Therefore, our ordered pair would be negative 2 and 0. So this is just yet another way that you can find your 0 when you're trying to do so for a test or a quiz or any activity you have. Now, one more thing that I want to do is I want to show you an example where we would run into a problem if we were using a table. Because once again, if I went back to the table, right, and it's very easy to find a 0 there because we can say, oh, it's negative 2 and 0. We found when y is 0, that gives us our ordered pair. Well, let's do one where that's not going to be the case. So I'm going to come back over and I'm just going to change this ever so slightly. Instead of 2x plus 4, I'm going to do 2x plus 1. And I'm going to go ahead and hit graph. Now I want you to notice, I'm going to zoom in on this real quick. I want you to notice, you can tell that this does not cross at 1. For instance, this is origin, it's 0, and then we have negative 1, negative 2. I want you to notice this crosses like halfway in between 0 and 1. And it looks to me like it's 0.5. But you don't know that for sure by looking at it. It might be 0.5, but it might not be. Now when it comes to our y-intercept, notice it is right here at positive 1, which we knew that because if I go back right, it's 2x plus 1. My y-intercept is positive 1. However, it doesn't tell me the 0. So I'm going to show you if I go to table, it won't show the 0. That shows the y-intercept 0, 1. But notice that it doesn't do half values. It goes straight to negative 1 and negative 1. So therefore, in this case, I cannot find my 0 in the table. So when that happens, you want to go back to your graph feature and just hit second and trace and go down to option 2 for 0, which is basically your x-intercept. Now once I hit enter, notice it's flashing and it says left bound. So I want to go to the left of where it crosses the x-axis. And I say to the left because if it crosses here, anywhere to the left of it is good. You could go as far down as you want, but really I usually just pass the 0 a little bit to the left and then I stop and hit enter. And then it says what is the right bound. So I'm going to click over to the right so it passes the 0 to the right. So there's my 0. It's now, the cursor is now to the right of it. Hit enter and enter again. and it tells me this 0 is going to be negative 0.5. So it was 0.5, which is what it looked like, right? But to be certain, because it could have been 0.6. So we want to be sure that we use the 0 feature to find the x-intercept if it is not on a point and you can't locate it in the table. So now you know how to find the 0 using a calculator. You know how to find the 0 by just simply looking at the graph if it happens to land on one of these lines, so it's a integer, and you know how to find it looking in the table. And that's all it is to finding zeros. Just remember that when it says 0, your 0 is your x-intercept. And when it says y-intercept, it's simply just where it crosses the y-axis.